So hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of the Underground. We're a free, pluralistic, and transnational university that started in a nightclub basement back in 2017. I am Naum, the head of program of I Want to Believe, a program about religion and belief systems. And today, I would like to introduce you to two very important people for our community. One is Lauren Alexander and Alexander Cromer.
Hello.
Thank you so much. I think I think we have seen you a lot, Alex, around, but Lauren.
Yes. Hi.
Yeah.
Hey everyone. Hi Noam. Yeah. No. Nice to meet you. I'm sorry I couldn't make it on Wednesday to meet you all, but I'm really happy you met my. We discovered that we are like destined to be a duo, Alex, with our names, right?
Yeah, I was when I was looking at the brief, I was like, there's some problem here, like names get duplicated.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, maybe, I mean, because we have heard from Alex, but Lauren, if you would like to tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I met Nelly back in 2016, 17. I think she approached me because she wanted me to join the University of the Underground tutors team. So I started with the very first master program as a tutor, and I have been teaching for about 12 years now, mostly at the Royal Academy of Arts in The Hague in the Netherlands. I'm sitting now in Amsterdam. So I got on board with the University of the Underground since in 2017 until 2019 with the master program. So the first cohort, of which Alex was part as well as master student. Since then, I've been working further on the research program that we did between Amsterdam and Cairo as well. That one was called Turquoise Desert. That I led that program together with Nelly, and we went together to do our adventure in Cairo. And the theme for that research cohort was water and also food as well. And yeah, besides for that, my background is a combination of basically design and art. I've done myself an MFA, a Master in Fine Art here in the Netherlands, and I've been living in Amsterdam for quite some time. I'm originally from South Africa. So we will talk to you guys about some of the projects that we've done and also about institutional collaboration today. So looking forward to that. So Alex and I know each other actually since 2017. And this is our first thing we do together, right, Alex?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's been a good collab so far. Looking forward to it. And also it's been a nice moment to kind of reflect for us on institutional collaboration and what that means, because I think what we realize is that probably when we started with the University of the Underground Master Program, we just kind of like went into it like all students need to collaborate with an institution. Like this is for sure a good idea to do this, but now we can actually say with some years having passed, like, okay, what went wrong and what worked well. So I think, you know, more that it's just a given part of the program, it's nice to reflect on that and to go through some examples. Alex, did you want to say anything else as that you left out of your introduction maybe on Wednesday? I don't know.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, that's all I have to say currently. Hi, how are you? I hope everything's going well. No, yeah. So I think today's going to be really nice because, like Lauren said, we've had some years to define what institution engagement means. So I am really happy to kind of go through, just previous work and my struggle with determining institutional engagement. So hopefully you won't have as much of a struggle. So that would be nice. But yeah, I mean, should we?
Yeah, let's just go ahead. We have like a little keynote that we're going to share. I hope that everybody is okay. I know you've had a lecture before us, just let us know if you need any breaks in between. Okay, keynote, you can see me, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so that's us. Okay, am I good to go? Do you also see the faces on the screen as well? Or you just see my screen? Okay. All right, so as I was mentioning, just by way of also introducing myself and to go into a little bit of detail on sort of how institutional collaborations have worked in previous research programs at the University of the Underground. So Turquoise Desert was a research program of also 3 months between December and March, I believe, 2020. We actually ended the program very abruptly because of Corona. But we had the opportunity to actually do this research program between 2 different cities, between Amsterdam and Cairo. And, you know, from the perspective of tutor on the program and also setting that up, and what I guess Noam is just busy with at the moment, being the head of program, is kind of thinking about how to structure the program and introduce students to a number of interesting experts and institutions, which could also be interesting for students to collaborate with. So here, this is a picture of us in the White Desert. And this desert trip, as part of our kind of research trajectory with this program, was also quite important, thinking about water and also the history of water in Egypt. So we spent a period of, I think it was less than 2 weeks, it was about 10 days in Egypt. And just to give you kind of, I'm not going to go into detail precisely about the program, but more thinking about sort of how did we navigate a particular topic, that being sort of the history of water and agriculture and food in Egypt, and how did we connect with different types of individuals or organizations who could help us with that. So these were a couple of people that we actually collaborated with when we were in Egypt. And those range from sort of experts. The lady on the top left, Hala Bakarat, she is an expert in ancient Egyptian agriculture and food, which was really fascinating to hear all about what the pharaohs were eating and the kind of archaeological remains from prehistoric times. And that we also spoke to university professors who were engaged with thinking about agriculture more from an academic perspective. Then Mesa Mustafa, who was our tour guide for the entire trip. So just to give you an idea of the different types of individuals that we were collaborating with, so that be that academics and experts, but also tour guides and people who actually learn with you on location, as well as Studio Khana on the bottom in the middle. And that was like a youth community group engaged with different types of community education, and also an organization who works with kind of research into architecture in downtown Cairo. So all kinds of different groups and individuals that we consulted during this very early stage of kind of like getting to know Egypt. And I think you might have an idea of Nelly's kind of pace and speed by now, I'm not sure, but she's the master of keeping up the pace. And so this was really, I don't think any Egyptian has done so much in sort of like a very short span of time, because it's also quite difficult to move around Cairo. I don't know if anyone's been there, but there's a lot of traffic. It's quite hard to get around the city, but we did a lot. So we, in terms of like introducing a sort of theme and the program, we engaged with lots of different types of organizations and institutions from the get-go. So just a completely different type of example when it comes to how to plan a program and also connect with different types of institutions. This was another project that we did, also another 3-month program. What you see here is basically documentation of the final outcome of the project, which was a week-long live radio show, which took place in Istanbul and was broadcast from the Istanbul Design Biennial. So what we actually did was, with a group of students, of which Alex was participating, is that we set up this little radio setup inside the art, or actually design biennial. And we kind of like parasited on that, I would say, to be able to broadcast live from Istanbul. But what the participants in the program were actually doing during this week of the broadcast is that they were doing their research essentially in Istanbul. So going out and researching economic models, which they could see on the streets. So going to visit markets, going to visit, well, all kinds of, I think someone was visiting furniture makers who were working in the area. And maybe Alex, I know, was going to look at what the fishermen were doing in Istanbul. So, you know, the students kind of were using this opportunity to be to be doing their field work in a place, but at the same time broadcasting live as we were going. So kind of like being in two modes at the same time, I would say, of kind of you know, hooking up with individual people of interest that they would like to speak to, or speaking to people on the streets in a very informal way, but at the same time, you know, from my perspective as tutor, we were kind of also embedding ourselves institutionally within an event which was going on there at the same time. So these are just two different examples of what we've been doing in terms of institutional collaborations within University of the Underground programs. Then I will hand over to Alex to explain.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we're going to be sharing, like Lauren said, we're going to be sharing a few of our projects that involve some institutional engagement. This is actually from my graduation. I collaborated with the Scheepvaart Museum, the Maritime Museum in Amsterdam, because I was really interested in Amsterdam's involvement in, you know, the colonial slave trade, really. And outside of the Maritime Museum is this humongous replica of Dutch East India skipper, which is just like a transport ship, which they claim wasn't a slave ship, but I mean, it looks a lot like one. So I was really keen on working with them. And my project had to do with me kind of becoming ice, in the sense that if I, as a person of color, am drowning in the after effects of the Middle Passage in an anti-Black climate, then by becoming ice, I could just float above all of this kind of anti-Black racism and anti-Black violence. So a lot of this project was me kind of reclaiming this ship. By doing workshops with it. I did a lot of tours. I talked a lot with the head of the museum. I'll touch on that a little bit later when we get into some of the do's and don'ts of documentation, because I messed up royally on this one. And I'm really happy to share how I corrected that in a bit. But yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I mean, as Alex has also just mentioned, that was part of the sort of University of the Underground, the first master program of 2 years, right? So what we did during that master program is much like you guys are actually doing now, is that you have a 3-month brief. Mm-hmm. And then also for all of those briefs, all the students had to, in fact, choose an institution independently to focus on. And you know, I have to say, like, from my perspective as tutor as well, I have worked in other schools where we also encourage kind of collaborating with outsiders and collaborating with other institutions for students. But I think that makes it that's quite unique about the University of the Underground, is that you guys are all asked to reach out individually to people who might interest you. So that is a big responsibility, actually, I would say, put on all the participants. And also requires, I guess, a level of bravery to be like, hey, I can connect very quickly and easily to people who I find interesting. And yeah, it demands a certain level of independence as to knowing how to navigate your own network, I think. But I guess all of you are very much capable of doing that. So what we thought, just to start off with, is to pick out the question actually from your brief. So you've received that on Wednesday, and it might all be quite overwhelming now as to all the input that you've got in the last few days. But just to kind of pick out again that key question which is in the brief. So that, I believe, is, I can't remember now which section it was, but I think it's in the part where it's instructing you on what form your project takes. So there's the requirement to come up with an artistic intervention. So that could be something like a performance, or a video, or an audio piece. I think it's quite open actually, but then there's some requirements as to the podcast and also the publication, right, that you guys have. There are several components to that. So this being the key question of the artistic component, the first kind of deliverable. So can or should religion or a belief system be used as a medium to radically reframe our belief systems being political, economical, and sociological, within and outside of institutions? So, okay, there's a kind of like reframing, rethinking of what belief systems are. And that is pretty open: political, economical, sociological. But even in this key question, to kind of get you going with your artistic research, it is mentioned, the fact that, are you looking inside institutions or outside of institutions? So already in this kind of initial question, I guess there will be some thinking as to, okay, which institutions are actually linked to belief systems? In that's quite wide as to which belief systems, but it still probably is one of the first things that you'll have to start already thinking about. So what's also mentioned in the brief, if you kind of, I think this is after your deliverable list, it mentions that how you're going to be doing this, or the method that you'll be using, is to develop strategies and inquisitions to build meaningful experiences and to practically apply them within the context of an institution of your choice. So I'm not sure if you've been into this in great detail yet with your tutors and maybe within your group, but whether you understand fully what the idea of a meaningful experience is. But the idea still is to choose, as we mentioned already, the institution independently, and then to develop your entire project in some kind of way in relation to that institution. So again, the method itself is pointing towards the fact that your institution is going to play a key role. Alex, I don't know if you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't. That's
we were really curious if you guys, or what you understood so far by meaningful experience and what that could mean. But maybe we can speak about that in the questions a bit later.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is actually an institution? This is maybe something that is nice to, I mean, maybe it's quite obvious for everyone, but maybe nice to also mention that I think in the context of the University of the Underground, that an institution is quite open. Probably Nelly has been through this with you already, but as I remember, we were basically wanting students to choose their institution based closely on what their interests are, what sort of project they envisioned, and then also to leave that quite open. I mean, it could be that your so-called institution is a shop which is close to your home, or it could be a specific expert that you want to engage with, or it could be an an educational group or an educational kind of community. Could also be a self-organized community group. It could be a non-governmental organization, a charity, a festival, an event. It could be something which is related to the government, or government related or government funded, let's say. It could be, as Alex already mentioned, the Scheepvaart Museum that he was collaborating with, or it could be an archive, for example. I mean, it really is very, very open, I think. And in that sense, maybe an institution is not necessary. I mean, I think maybe an institution almost narrows it down too much. I think it could also be any kind of collaborator that can also contribute to your project. I think that's what's important, and perhaps even also could help you to create an audience for your project as well.
Can I add to that?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that. Yeah, I think this kind of collaboration in and of itself becomes like an apparatus for your project. So it took all of us, and when I say all of us, I mean like every single cohort before you, including mine. It takes some time to kind of realize what this looks like and what this means. But I think for me personally, it changed a lot if I considered my search for an institution and considering that collaboration as an apparatus with which both the institution and myself used to create this kind of artistic intervention, instead of using the collaboration as a tool, so to speak, or an instrument of creation. Yeah, I think that differentiation for me really helped with who I choose as an institution and how I approach. So hopefully that's also helpful for you.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Okay, so now, well, we thought it could be nice for each of us, like Alex and I, to both walk through step by step through collaborative projects. Not to say that these are like, well, maybe Alex has a very great project. I'm looking forward to him explaining his. But I wanted to say, not to say that these are the examples of like exactly how you should be doing things, but also maybe, yeah, kind of a taste of like also the complexities of collaboration and what that brings with it. Or at least in my example, that's what I wanted to also highlight. So I'm kind of bringing out of my archive my first big collaborative project that I did in 2011. And yeah, for me it was, well, I was doing my master's study at that time. So for me it was quite an overwhelming project to work on, which required a lot of energy and kind of stamina. But it also took place over a period of 3 months. So I thought, okay, maybe it's interesting to also compare that a bit. Although I have to say that I had to work very hard to get the funding before all of this began. So I guess actually it was a bit longer than 3 months, the entire project span. So this was, it was called the Cardboard Monument Project. And I worked on this for 3 months with a community art school in South Africa. So as I mentioned, I'm from South Africa, but I haven't grown up actually in this part of the country. So for me, this was also a whole adventure in getting to know a new part of the country and also learning how to navigate around there in times before smartphones. The basic like premise of the whole project, and I don't want to go into this with too much detail, but this is a very important, historically speaking, a political site in South African history, this square, which used to be a soccer field or a football field. And this is the site of where the first freedom charter in the country was signed. This was in the 50s. And after apartheid, I'm taking for granted that you know a little bit about what apartheid in South Africa is about, but after apartheid was abolished in 94, the constitution of the country was actually developed based on the Freedom Charter that it signed in the 50s on this very site. So it became very symbolic and important, this place, which then subsequently, like many other sites in South Africa, were turned into a public space, but which turned out not to be so public. In other words, it's a monument space which is mostly inhabited by white tourists from abroad who come to visit this space, but which has basically alienated the neighborhood and the neighboring communities around the area. So the point of this project was to kind of revisit some of the lost memories of this community, working together with this art school who are based in this area, and to recreate a temporary exhibition space for a week. So that was the premise. And so, you know, in terms of collaboration and finding collaborative partners in this space, that took a lot of energy. And that was a lot of the pre-work that I did also before, to kind of like bring together different kinds of institutions and collaborators to this public space. And of course, the minute that you work with a project in public space in general, you realize how complicated things become, especially in the case of this square, because it is supposed to be public, but it is not really. So it actually is owned by the hotel, which is next door, and the shops that are around. And then you find out who all the stakeholders are actually in the public space. So these are kind of like the phases of the project of negotiations and mapping out a teaching program together with the head of the school. This is in Soweto, which is close by to the monument area. Yeah, this was also for everyone involved quite exciting, because there were a lot of alumni from the school who were actually engaged with the project. And for them, kind of doing field work and incorporating that within artistic outcomes was something which they hadn't really done that much of in the past. So we had to together form kind of like structure a whole program around that. And then going to speak to people who were surrounding this monument area, and yeah, like kind of talking about old memories. I remember this conversation was about the old movie theater, which used to be in the area, which was demolished in I think the 70s already. And people could remember the stories still from this old cinema, which was no longer there. So collecting kind of stories and kind of investigating this, you know, through the people who were living around this monument, what used to be there. And then a kind of process of like building up the plans that we had for the whole outside exhibition on the square, with our security guard watching us all the time, because of course we're in Johannesburg. It's quite, I think, the crime capital of the world, let's say. So it was quite, yeah, something to kind of like also take care of the security of everyone. And then I decided to make like this little funny diagram thing to kind of map out for myself, okay, what were actually, who were the collaborators who were involved in this project? So you had like the art school and the alumni who were there, who we were working with, the teachers involved. And then at the other side of the spectrum is kind of the public space, where actually the sort of stakeholders there, as I mentioned, were like the shops and the hotels on that public space, who then actually were the ones to negotiate with in terms of having the use of the space. You know, otherwise it would be like a very expensive endeavor to place something on that public square. Then, of course, there's the collaborative efforts. Like I also worked together with an architect and a builder who was helping to put together the whole structure and to give the expertise of like the safety and the security of everything and the materials and so on. And then also, and probably most importantly, is the community who are there, and like how to sort of like also engage with the community, which are, I mean, it's also problematic sort of like in a way, you know, how to come as an outsider to a community and how to talk to people there. You know, this is also something that's not just, you can just do, and you also have to think about how that could be possible and how to approach those things and how to show also a kind of long-term investment in what that project is and what it could mean in the future. So, as I said, not probably, you know, like, I'm not saying if I had to do the project again, I'd probably do it very differently. And for me, it was I went into it in a very naive way, I think. But for me, it was eye-opening how complex things can be. And also, yeah, how much time and investment and kind of, yeah, sort of sincere engagement in the topic and in the place that I also needed to have. All right, so that's my project that I did way back when, and now I'm going to pass on to Alex to talk about a project that he worked on at University of the Underground.
Thank you, Lauren. Real quick, Iram, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Is it Iram?
Yes.
Yes. So Lauren, Iram has a question about your project. Do you want to wait till after, or do you want to answer the question?
Oh, I'd be happy to answer, but sorry, I don't see the chat now, so I don't see what the question is. Could you maybe repeat it if you wrote it?
I haven't typed it, but we can also wait until the end. I don't mind.
Okay, if it's sure, if it's specific to this particular project, I don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So before the pandemic, I was working in Cape Town in an NGO working on today's effects of the apartheid. And I was actually very interested in oral history as well. And when you were talking about the cardboard projects, you mentioned that you went to the community and asked for their stories. And I find it really interesting to bring the concept of oral history to projects like this. So I was just wondering, like, where does this thing of oral history stay in that cardboard projects? Because I couldn't really catch the phrases on the cardboards. And yeah, I was wondering the general response by the community, basically, because I was actually planning to do something similar, but the pandemic didn't allow me. It wasn't something like this, but I was planning to do something related to oral history because I think it's really interesting. So yeah, I was just wondering. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. No, nice that you were there. So basically, like, those inscriptions that are the statements that are there, and I haven't gone into loads of detail about the content of that project, but it's basically the Freedom Charter. So that's the Freedom Charter kind of painted onto the sides of the monument that kind of like lift up and are exposed onto the outside. And what I didn't quite mention is that the whole idea of this cardboard structure, and maybe if I go back to this one, you can see it. So here you see on the right-hand side, the official monument, which is like the brick one. And then inside of this brick monument, you have like a round table where the Freedom Charter is etched into stone with an eternal flame in the middle, which never worked. The eternal flame never even ignited any sparks. So there's this whole kind of irony of sort of the Freedom Charter, which is our historical legacy and the legacy of this place, which it is now a kind of fucked up monument, to put it really in a stupid, silly way. But this kind of cardboard gesture, and also putting the Freedom Charter on the outside of the monument, and to kind of like open it up in this public sense of being made from very fragile material, was also a gesture to momentarily activate the space with these ideas. That was the idea. And then inside, all the participants made all kinds of like projects and kind of booklets, and there was also a kind of video and I think an audio as well related to oral history, which was presented, but then in a temporary sense inside the setting. But the main idea was to activate the space and get the community, which we had engaged, to come and look at this exhibition. Like, that was for me, like, if people came, and they did come, that was a success. That was kind of the indicator of the impact for me. because nobody was using this as a public space. As I say, because it was literally every day you see busloads of actually European tourists, mostly because local tourists are too scared to come here to this area. So it's sort of like a very awkward space. So it was just there was no long-term goal, but just actually a more short-term activation kind of idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important because the states have tremendous amount of effort to hide their crimes during those periods. So these projects like this to bring oral history and the reality to the common space, I think it's really valuable. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, Alex, I go back to you.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you, Lauren. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to go over a project that I did during my master's course at University of the Underground. Just some background. Excuse me. The brief was also, yeah, I think it was 3 months long, just about, because we started at the end of March, April, May. Yeah, May, mid-May was the time that we had to present. So around the same amount of time as you guys. The brief was about, sorry, I have 2 screens. So I'm looking at one screen and talking to you. But the brief was about kind of identify some kind of collective trauma within an institution and reenact it through an operatic form. This brief is kind of special because we had, there was an institution innately like embedded within the brief in and of itself, because we're working with the Dutch National Opera House. But additionally, on top of that, all of us had to seek out an institution. And at the time, I was really interested in moths. Just as a preface, I'm going to kind of just go through this whole process. But I was interested in moths as kind of like the, I don't want to say the mascot, but as a symbol of a marginalized community. I was interested in this because I kind of felt that moths, I mean, moths and butterflies basically operate in the same manner. They do the same things. They help pollinate flowers. However, butterflies operate during the day. They're beautiful. Everybody loves butterflies, but moths operate during the nighttime. They're weird. You don't really want them in your house. You have like moth traps, like these UV lights that like capture and zap moths. So I was really interested in this kind of like movement in invisible spaces and being kind of taken down by this artificial light. And I'm kind of comparing that to being a person of color or a queer person or just any kind of marginalized community kind of operating within these invisible spaces. So when we started the Repeat After Me brief, I quickly learned of a group community in the Netherlands. Community of Moluccans. And just to give a little bit of background here, really quickly, thank you so much, Lauren. Really quickly, so the Isle of Maluku is in Indonesia. And yeah, so which is a Dutch colony, used to be a Dutch colony. After World War II, the Japanese took this colony, and after the war was over, all of Indonesia fought for their independence because the Dutch wanted their colonies back. However, the people in the colonies were like, fuck that, we're independent now, we don't need you. There was kind of a battle for independence, and the Isle of Maluku, those inhabitants were fighting for the Dutch in the Dutch colonial army. After the situation became very unstable, it was kind of a civil war, basically. These Moluccan soldiers and their families were not safe in Indonesia. So the Netherlands brought them to the Netherlands. The Dutch brought them to the Netherlands, excuse me, gave them kind of temporary shelters and housing outside of city centers with the promise that, like, as soon as we stabilize the situation, you guys can go back, which never really happened. These people were all dismissed from their military service, which was a huge part of their identity. They were all dismissed of their military service. They're all kind of kept outside of Dutch civilization, outside of city centers. For example, like there was a Moluccan camp outside of the city of Vught in the Netherlands. which was an old like Nazi concentration camp that got repurposed to house these Moroccan soldiers. So first generation kind of got shafted. Second generation, they felt so invisible that they started to kind of do some very radical revolutionary acts in the 1970s. Like for instance, hijacking a train to demand, integration into Dutch society. And that was a whole mess. Then Moluccans got identified as terrorists after that, which was just really, really messy. So come this third generation of Moluccans, they're looking for elevation. They're looking to not be invisible, but they're looking to maintain visibility through other means outside of kind of like radical revolutionary acts, which led me to the group of Moluccan fighters. Do you want to do the next slide? Thank you. So the Moluccan Fighters are a Netherlands-based Thai kickboxing organization. I don't even remember how I got in touch with them. I don't know, quite honestly, I think I did like Moluccan Netherlands Google search and got in touch with this guy, Mika Tihitu, who's the leader of, not the leader, I guess the main organizer, or the front man of the Moluccan Kickboxing Association. He created this association to elevate Moluccan identity to beyond the Dutch, to like a global platform through boxing. If you want to do the next slide, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So the beautiful thing about this, and this, I think this is very important to remember for all of you, is that it's really, really important to identify and reach out to your institution almost immediately. I kind of lucked out because Mika was super on board with almost everything that I had suggested. And this is just an example of the very, very first message that I wrote to him. April 6th, 2018, which was just like a week after we started the brief. Super simple communication. To be honest, I had done a lot of research on this organization, on the history of the Moluccans in the Netherlands. So I kind of sort of crafted my initial reach out, given all the research that I had done.
You went to the museum in Vught, I remember.
Yeah, I went to the museum in Vught, which was really interesting. I got in touch with so many different organizations, reaching out to everything all at once, all at the same time of just continuing this research, the historical research, and also kind of practically continuing my research of kind of like moths, really. If you want to do the next slide, please. Yeah. So this led me to actually go to, I was invited to a practice session of the Moluccan Thai kickboxers, which was really, really fascinating and super intimidating, because these guys are like, I mean, not just men, there were like women there. They're also, I'm pretty sure there were also some non-binary people there as well. But no matter who they were, everybody was jacked as fuck. I felt so intimidated. But we got invited to this session, which was really, really beautiful, because my collaborator, Tom, and myself got a chance to not only speak to this third generation of Moluccans, who are very active in their communities, who are very hyper aware of this kind of intergenerational trauma that they inherited from their parents and their grandparents. There was a sense of like, there was definitely a sense of anger that they were kind of channeling outwards through boxing. It was very beautiful, very poetic. But this is the kind of like research that happens as soon as you kind of align yourself and attach yourself to an institution. And this is, very practical field research. Do you want to do the next slide? Yeah, so all throughout the course of that training session, Tom and myself really talked to everyone. We recorded everything. We even boxed. I don't have any pictures of us boxing, which is probably really good because it was really embarrassing. So I don't want you to see that anyway. But yeah, if you want to do the next slide, please. Okay, now, part of this, and I think maybe we're going to get into how the process can become part of the outcome, and also how you can document things. Tom and I took our field recorders and we recorded the sounds of almost everything. We recorded the sounds of people talking, of feet moving on the ground, of boxing gloves hitting other boxing gloves. And we ended up using that as a form of document, we ended up making that, into music for our presentation for the opera that we would do later, as a form of documentation and as a form of like institutional collaboration. And I think I have a sample here. I think, Lauren, if you just click that slide.
Yeah, I hope it works. My sound is on live, so like hopefully, yeah. You hear it?
Yeah, I can hear it. Okay. Well, the sound isn't that good. But you can hear the percussion in this track. The percussion in this track is really just the sounds of feet hitting boxing mats, of boxing gloves hitting other boxing gloves. This kind of contact, this dialogue, this kind of physical dialogue that we experienced during that.
Sorry, Alex, do you want me to?
No, that's okay. We could skip to the next. We could skip to the next slide. Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, you can use alternative methods of documentation and embed them within the outcome of your project, of whatever you're doing. Also, they really helped with research. This quote from Noah, who's this? This guy was so intimidating. You ever meet someone that like they're just a brick wall, like emotionless? This guy's really big. And he has this really deep voice, and he has to look down on you because he's like 6'5" or something like that. I don't know what that is in centimeters. But we started talking to them just about their experience in the Netherlands. And I was kind of relating my experience being just kind of like Black Dominican dude in the United States, and kind of using that as a meeting ground to kind of connect with the Moroccan experience. And this right here, what Noah said, we have been fighting for others since the first sails appeared on the horizon. My people do not know what it feels like to be free. That was something that really resonated with me, and also resonated with Tom. And we kind of took this as kind of a source for our outcome. If you want to hit the next slide, please. Thank you so much. Yeah, so through that conversation, we realized that this first generation of Moluccans that arrived in the Netherlands really kind of, their whole world got upended when they were dismissed from the military. We heard stories of grandparents receiving like this notice from the Dutch government about how they were no longer in the colonial army, and that they would no longer be returning to their home. And this letter was super important. And we ended up getting our hands on a copy of one of the letters from one of the members of the Moluccan kickboxing team. And this here on the right is a copy of that letter. The woman on the left is Mika Diitu's mom, who made such wonderful Indonesian delights for us, which was amazing. Anyway, so we took this letter and I used it to inform the libretto that I would eventually write. We also kind of took the rhythm of this letter, reading it. We recorded a dramaturge, a Dutch dramaturge read this letter out to us. We recorded her voice, and then we kind of used the rhythm of her voice to also inform the music production that we would later make. Thank you, thank you, Lauren. So this institutional collaboration was so intense that Mika was so involved in this process from the very beginning, from our research to the production of the music, because he heard everything that we were doing. he read the text that I had wrote, and he even offered to come and participate in the actual performance itself, which I thought was just really, really fantastic. He really appreciated the kind of the fact that we're kind of focusing on his trauma and focusing on this kind of intergenerational trauma, that he almost came up with the kind of movement of the opera, like the mise en scène. He came up with that almost entirely by himself, because he was just that invested in the project. His idea was that he would kind of come to the stage first, and kind of pass on these movements that he had learned, to help channel his anger, to help channel his ancestral anger in a way. And he's passing these movements and these rituals, these kind of physical rituals onto me, to kind of take it to my own place and take it further. Yeah. So during the actual performance, it was like May 16th, 2018 or so, Mika and myself, yeah, we performed this thing together. That's us looking pretty badass, actually. If you want to go to the next slide, please. I turned the sound off because I don't want anybody to hear, but I do want you to see kind of how I'm just kind of following Mika's lead. There's Tom over to the right jamming out with his guitar. But yeah, so this kind of institutional collaboration, if I go back to saying the collaboration as an apparatus and not a tool for creation, but an apparatus within which creation happens. This whole project is definitely in collaboration with Mika Tahitu and the Moluccan Fighters. Yeah, they helped shape this project just as much as Tom and I did. And I think the takeaway here is that, I mean, but number one, by just aligning yourself with someone immediately, and getting someone involved in your research process, even if you don't know what the hell you're doing, I think is really important, and can lead to some like really, really beautiful and poetic moments. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. We're good.
Yeah.
You can move on to the next.
I wanted to also just maybe add, Alex, I hope, is that okay? You're done?
I mean, go ahead. What you got?
Yeah, what was really special about this group, or this cohort of students as well, is that there were very talented musicians amongst them. As you see, Alex is a talented performer and a spoken word artist. He didn't mention that, but I'm saying it for him. And also Tom is a musician and who's been performing his own music in a band for many years. So it was really exciting to see how all of the talents came together. And one of the things about this brief that maybe it didn't come off so clearly is the fact that every group was actually tasked to make an opera. So we were working in collaboration as well, sort of on an umbrella level for all the different student groups with the Dutch National Opera. So that was, you know, like we were talking about one of the student institutional collaborations, but on a broader level, there was also this idea of the Dutch National Opera. And actually this is inside the Dutch National Opera where they're performing.
Yeah, No, go ahead, Juan. Sorry.
No, I mean, it's just, I think it's incredible that everybody managed to work within that restraint in that format of the opera. Yeah. Which is because some of the other institutional collaborations were like, for example, with Deliveroo, with the other group, they were working together with Deliveroo and then scripting an opera, a Deliveroo opera. So, I mean, it was just like, I think in your group, in the case of your collaboration, it was just so amazing that he was there and actually performing with you.
I really like I was really appreciating this this kind of tension, right? Because so the Moluccans have this history with the Dutch, and the Dutch National Opera House is kind of like this. I mean, yeah, it's this institution. It's like a super white colonial institution, and was something really poetic about bringing Mika inside of this institution to represent his story. within the Dutch National Opera House, which I mean, he was so, yeah, I was so happy that he was there. He was so elated to be there too. It was just really amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can move on.
We don't have too much time left. We only have about 10 minutes left, and then maybe we'll have some questions after. Okay, so we wanted to kind of sum up with, you know, maybe just in recapping a couple of the points from the two projects that we've now been talking about, or maybe some thoughts that you all have in mind. But just to kind of sum up the why and how and when to do collaborative institutional collaborations or collaborations in general. So these are just some thoughts, and it's probably just a few points in a longer list, which we could probably make. So why a collaboration? Like, why is this important? What does it actually bring to your project? And here are some thoughts. So to gather information, to understand a problem, as it were, to get kind of a local insight into your particular topic. So I guess with Alex, in your case, it was like, okay, how to understand what is, you had never heard of the Moluccan people from Indonesia, probably before the project. So to understand, like, okay, who are these people? Why are they doing this? Why are martial arts important within their kind of identity struggles, or their kind of like community, sort of like just gathering, also just understanding, and for you also going to see and to witness these people gathering is also kind of, yeah, you had to also do your homework, let's say, as to like understand the background of that, to understand how a problem is contextualized. So I guess maybe just to stay on the same example is to understand what the Moluccan community means also within the Dutch context. So maybe that means, yeah, I guess these ideas really would have come in conversation with Mika. You know, a lot of the information that you learned about this is not just also getting your infos, like understanding what it is and who they are, but also understanding what it means to them and what it means also to his family. And I think that really comes through very strongly in that letter, the letter that you showed with the slide with his mom. So, you know, the situatedness of, yeah, this kind of community and what it means within this kind of colonial Dutch context, and also in the Netherlands today, of course. Then, yeah, also to understand the impact of artistic practice. So also, you know, to maybe, what I'm trying to say here is to also shift our practices out of the arts bubble and also move it more into other disciplines. So for this particular project that Alex is picking up on, I mean, you could have also done this performance, let's say, inside the gym, the community center, or maybe at any kind of festivity, or, you know, linked to the community, that particular work or that kind of like artistic creation that you did there could also move into different places and have also different audiences, because in fact you kind of like I think that is what you gain from that collaboration as well, is that it doesn't just stay within the arts community for the arts community.
Yes, of course, of course. We have another question. Do you want to? Yeah, just shoot the question. Ask us your question.
Yes, coming from let's say privileged positions, how do you avoid to encounter the problems that the Laurens seem to have in Cape Town in South Africa? Also, how to avoid like epistemological appropriation and all these sort of problems that may arise with going to work with other institutions or with institutions. That's
do you mind if I, okay, I'm going to take a stab at this because so I was working with Tom. I work with Tom a lot, but I was working with Tom in this project, and we had a very serious conversations, multiple conversations about this, right? Because this whole project, my project, was kind of about a marginalized community and how my background in that and Mika's background in that, but Tom just as this kind of like cisgender white English dude, like where is he in all of this and how does he fit into this discussion? And I really think I really think that's where this kind of apparatus of collaboration comes from instead of a tool, right? Where if you consider this collaboration as an equal thing, or maybe you're kind of using yourself as an amplifier or a platform for whatever kind of institution, whatever institutional message or whatever the institution is going through, or whatever. I think that's why if you kind of be very, very careful with how your approach is in a collaborative sense, that you're not using this institution to create your work, but you and the institution are creating your work together. Then I think you kind of avoid any kind of appropriation or anything of that sort. It's a very delicate fine line to walk. But yeah, really working with the institution, getting the institution's approval or disapproval in the sense, and I can maybe talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, I think that's how you can kind of walk that line. What do you think, Lauren?
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I think, I mean, the tricky thing here is that you have a very short period of 3 months. And I think these things sometimes, you know, they take some time to gain the trust of the people that you're working with and to understand each other, and to also understand what your needs are from both sides. So I think, and I hope I'm not sort of like projecting ideas onto Alex's collaborator, but I think that for Mika, it was also important to gain visibility for his practice, for what he's doing, for his school, for him to also spread the ideas that you were concerned with, as in like generational trauma. And that he understood like all of these things and also connected very deeply with them, I think. So I think if there's a mutual benefit for both sides, there shouldn't really, and that's quite clear and communicated nicely with each other. I think that is a good way to sidestep sort of appropriation in a nasty sense.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sort of. I was more curious about Lauren's experience, but I really need to say this because it's kind of boiling inside of me. But I really find it disrespectful that you refer to Cape Town as the capital crime city of the world, which doesn't even have like a factual basis. And especially after working with a community that in a way try to open their stories to you and all this stuff. So in a way, I find there's a lot of dissonance between what you are trying to explain with your presentation and how you also refer to the people that you work with. So I'm sorry to say it out loud, but it's boiling inside of me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do you want me to respond, or do you want to?
Whatever you.
Okay. I guess I meant was you know, it's actually Johannesburg, so it's not Cape Town that I was talking about, but it has like the highest murder rate in the world. Just like.
That's not true.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry. I mean, it has been true in the past, I'm sure, but there's no kind of. I'm not putting any judgment on that because I grew up there, so it's not. I mean, I'm as part of it as everyone else, I guess. Okay, I hope that answers you. I mean, I'm happy to speak further about it, but
Yeah. I mean, this a little bit off topic in a way, but not really. Yeah, because I mean, I think it all connects with this sort of position also, like in artistic practice nowadays, and in social sciences as well, to come from a privileged place and just try to impose a certain activity or a certain position, and also like in a way, excavate certain local knowledges. So yeah, it's not specific also to this presentation, but something that I've been finding more and more common in these sort of scenarios.
Yeah. No, I think that's also for me why I try to emphasize, and I don't mean to say it in too much of a casual sense, but this is something that for me, it's the first time that I involved myself in such things. So I learned a lot also from that, as in if I were to engage myself in such a project again, I wouldn't do it in the same way. Exactly, because I also myself found it problematic and came up against a lot of these kind of issues, and also wrote my master's thesis about this. So yeah, I'm very much willing to talk further about that, and I think it also brings up issues that everyone probably should take into caution as well. So it's not, I'm not saying it's an example project like everybody needs to do it in this way, but it brings up important points. Thank you. I don't know what your name is. Tutti Frutti.
Francisco.
Oh, Francisco, thank you. Okay, we just have a couple more slides, and then we can maybe loop back to questions and some more thoughts. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so how to collaborate? That's the next topic. So what was the previous was why, right?
Yeah.
So why, like, what is the, I guess, what are we wanting to achieve, I guess? How? So just some thoughts. Pick a collaborator in line with your ideas. In other words, something that makes sense for a topic or a domain that you'd like to research. So I'm sure that you all come to this program with some topics of interest, some things that you would like to look into. So I guess you start with finding collaborators or institutions in line with that. Introduce yourself early. Oh, sorry, there's a typo. And I think that Alex also touched on that a little bit, like, hey, it was really worth it for you to be in touch with Mika at an early stage, to kind of also have time to see each other several times, to go and see the practice sessions that they were doing, and to build up a bit of trust between the two of you over a longer time period.
Exactly, yeah.
So understand the benefits for both sides. What would both you and Mika, for example, want to get out of the project, and why for both of you is there an invested interest in it, in this research? Allow time for multiple meetings. Yeah, that's something I think that's important. We often had student groups who would kind of be very nervous to make the initial contact with somebody to collaborate with, but then it wouldn't allow time for like a follow-up interview or other finalized kind of testings of experiments and things like this. So I think just reach out early and try to allow time for your whole project to evolve together with your collaborator. To understand what the expectations are from both sides, I think is super important, and also how much time you're going to be needing from other people is important to set out from the get-go. Okay, so Alex and I were chatting briefly about also, again, the question of when to reach out and how this fits in also with your research process. So here are 4 suggested project phases, let's say, for any kind of artistic research that you're doing. So, well, this is something that I usually share with students in the final year of their study at the other course that I'm teaching. But I mean, maybe you find this useful to think about the stages of a practice in 4 phases. So generating knowledge is a phase where you can like gather information, really understand more about the topic. Safeguarding knowledge, meaning like the period of your research where you take all of your knowledge and you kind of think about how to structure that, how to categorize it, how to tell a story from that, like what is the narrative. And then really possibly in that phase 2, you're kind of distilling also a research question, which you can more particularly focus on. Releasing knowledge is then finding different ways to articulate what that research question is, or to experiment in materials to further flesh out that initial question. And then transferring knowledge is kind of like testing, working with audiences and thinking more about communication in terms of like helping other people to be on board with your story and what you want to tell. Mm-hmm. Now, considering we've got 3 months of for your project, the 3-month brief, that's around 12 weeks. You see for yourself, perhaps you find it more important to collaborate with people in the first part of the project where you're actually gathering information. For example, if you want to speak to experts, if you want to, gather kind of more informational content, then it's worthwhile to get in touch sooner and kind of like consult maybe as many people as you can. Whereas if you would like to, I don't know, maybe your collaborator is more related to your audience, so they come in at a later stage. I mean, it really does depend on what kind of a project you design. Also for yourself, I mean, thinking again of Alex's example, it was worthwhile that you had actually got in touch, let's say in phase 1 to 2 of the project, so that you could really work together to also develop together in collaboration the stage 4, like the transferring of the knowledge and the communication again of that. Okay, then we just thought like a couple of things that could be good to remember, and I know Alex has a specific anecdote about a documentation boo-boo that went wrong.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so it's super important to document pretty much everything that you're doing, even just outside of this program, even in your own practices. But it's specifically in this program, because I know we're going to ask for like, well, where's your documentation of this institutional engagement? Do you have like the audio clip of this interview or whatever? But my dumbass with my interview with the Maritime Museum, I forgot to hit record on my mic. So I didn't get any audio. And furthermore, like my battery died on my camera. So I only got like 5 minutes of video footage of nothing in particular, of just a desk. And then, the director of the Maritime Museum comes over and sits down a cup of tea in front of me, and then the video cuts out. So then at that point, it's like, how do you document this process? And just I guess as a real quick example, so I kind of learned from what Tom did for our opera project, and all the little bits of audio that I got, all the video that I got, I just remixed into like kind of, the audio I remixed into a musical form. So my graduation project had like a lot of music, a lot of spoken word, with as many audio clips as I could to inform and also form the basis of this musical arrangement. So I guess, documentation is really, really important, but documentation doesn't necessarily always have to mean like, here is a picture of this. Your documentation could be alternative as well. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I think that kind of goes into like this next point about how the process can be a potential outcome. I might be mistaken, Lauren, you can correct me if I'm incorrect, but I think with the project with Tom and myself, the process, this documentation of us going to this training session becoming part of the outcome in and of itself. I think is a good example of that bullet point. Sorry, Laura, I'm just going to take over the slide. So
do it.
Cool, great. Yeah, so when you're and this kind of goes back to maybe like Francisco's question, in a more general sense about like appropriation, is that if you're working with somebody, credit them, basically. Unless it's like, yeah, you're not creating this thing, you're not a brain in a vat, you're kind of, you have entanglements with everything and everybody around you. So when you're kind of putting together your collaboration and making your work, just really make sure that if it's not coming from you, that you credit that and credit your sources, your collaborators, and also celebrate them in a way. When you're testing your outcome with collaborators, that can be very difficult. They're not always going to appreciate what you made. In the case of my work with the Maritime Museum, I had recorded, with permission, a conversation between the director and I, and she had said something like supremely, like, I don't know, I kind of racist in a bit. That I used in a song that I made, and I played it back to her, and she was not happy about it at all. But it kind of made this really interesting discussion, this tension that needed to be discussed, just about her role as a director of this kind of colonial institution, and how that affects like other people. So when testing your outcome, that's super important. Always. Whatever you make, always send it back to the collaborator, always send it back to the institution, get their feedback on it, and then maybe kind of go from there. And also, yeah, just be transparent. I mean, transparency is good in general in your daily practice in your life. So just always be transparent, specifically in this case, when sharing your outcomes with the institution and collaborators. Be transparent with yourself. I think that's an important lesson I learned also. Being honest with yourself and your intentions is going to take you places in life. Yeah.
Thanks, Alex.
Hey, you're welcome, Lauren.